Thought I had it all, until I walked in on my husband and sister together. I had everything I ever wanted. At least, that's what I thought. My name is Clara, and on paper, my life was perfect. I had a loving husband, John, 2 beautiful children, and a beautiful home in the suburbs. People envied us. They thought we had the kind of marriage everyone dreamed of, the kind of love that never fades, the kind of family that stays close-knit and strong. For years, I believed it too. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the small, unsettling things that kept happening. At first, it was the late nights. John would come home from work later than usual, sometimes hours after he promised. When I asked about it, he'd brush it off, telling me he was working on something important. I trusted him. I didn't want to seem paranoid. After all, we were married, we had kids, and life was busy. Then there was my sister, Emily. She was everything I wasn't: outgoing, adventurous, free-spirited. We'd grown up together, always close, always there for each other. But in the last year, something felt off. She'd changed. She was different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was a distance between us. Little things, like the way she'd laugh too loudly at John's jokes, or how her gaze lingered a little too long whenever he'd look at her. I told myself I was being ridiculous. After all, they were family, and nothing could ever happen between them. That was until the day everything fell apart. I had to leave for a business trip, something I rarely did. I remember packing my suitcase, kissing my kids goodbye, and hugging John tight. I had no idea this trip would change everything. A few days later, I came back early, excited to see my family after being away. I hadn't expected to be home so soon, so I didn't warn anyone. I walked in through the front door, expecting the usual warmth. Instead, I heard laughter coming from upstairs. My heart fluttered, thinking maybe John and Emily were hanging out, something they used to do before things started feeling weird. But as I walked up the stairs, I felt something shift, a tightness in my chest. I rounded the corner of the hallway and froze. There they were, John and Emily, in my bed, kissing. The kind of kiss that told me everything I needed to know. Time stood still. My body went cold. My knees nearly buckled under me, but somehow I stayed standing. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The look on their faces was the worst part. They didn't try to hide it. They didn't even look guilty at first. Emily immediately pulled away, tears rushing to her eyes. But John just stared at me, a hollow emptiness in his gaze. No explanation, no apology. I thought I might pass out. It didn't feel real. Emily tried to speak. Clara, it wasn't supposed to happen. Please, don't hate me. But her words didn't reach me. Nothing she said made sense. How could my own sister betray me like this? And how could John, the man I gave everything to, the father of my children, be the one to destroy everything? John stood there, still. And then, in a voice I didn't recognize, he said, "I never loved you the way you thought I did." The world tilted. My hands trembled as I clutched the doorframe for support. He continued, his voice flat, "I married you because you were the safe choice. But I've always loved Emily." Those words, they hit me harder than any blow could. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the truth. The truth I never saw coming. My whole life, everything I believed about our love, was built on lies. John didn't even try to explain himself, not really. He didn't beg for forgiveness. It was almost as if he was telling me that this had always been the way it was supposed to be. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run away, but I was paralyzed. The shock ran too deep. And then, the words that would haunt me forever. "I was with you because you were the right choice. But Emily, she was always the one I loved." The silence between us was unbearable. It was as if the world had stopped moving, and I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape from. I felt like I was drowning, unable to take a single breath without choking on the suffocating weight of betrayal. John didn't move. He didn't say anything else, just stood there, looking at me with that same empty expression. His words echoed in my mind, spinning in circles. I was with you because you were the right choice. The right choice? Was I nothing more than a placeholder in his life? Did he even love me at all? The man I trusted, the father of my children, had been lying to me for years. Every time I'd asked him if he was okay, if there was something wrong between us, he'd lied. He'd made me feel crazy for doubting him. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My chest felt like it was going to collapse under the weight of the truth. And then Emily, my sister, reached out to me. Clara, please. I never wanted to hurt you. It just happened. I swear it wasn't planned. I don't know how we got here. Her voice sounded panicked, desperate for my forgiveness. But how could I forgive her? How could I look at her the same way? The woman who had been my best friend, my closest confidant, the one I shared everything with, how could she have done this to me? I didn't have words for her. I couldn't find the strength to say anything. Instead, I turned and walked out of the room, my body moving on autopilot. I needed space. I needed air. I needed to be away from them both. I ran out the front door, breathing in the cold night air, trying to clear my mind. But every breath was heavy, every thought poisoned by the image of them together. I walked aimlessly down the street, feeling like a stranger in my own life, in my own body. When I finally came back, hours had passed. It was after midnight, and the house was eerily quiet. I could hear the soft murmur of my children's breath through the walls, but the warmth of the house felt foreign now. Everything felt wrong. I walked upstairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. John was sitting on the bed, staring at his hands. He didn't look up when I entered, didn't acknowledge my presence. His silence was louder than any argument we could have had. You didn't even try to stop it, I said, my voice trembling. Not once. You let it happen. And you let her do this to me. John raised his head, his eyes bloodshot. He looked defeated, but that didn't matter to me. The damage was already done. I didn't want to hurt you, Clara. I really didn't. I just couldn't stop what I was feeling. You didn't want to hurt me? I could feel the rage boiling inside me, but it wasn't the kind of rage that came with screaming. It was a quiet, cold kind of anger, the kind that leaves you numb inside. You've been hurting me for years, John, and now you want me to feel sorry for you. His face softened, but the regret in his eyes didn't make up for what had happened. I never wanted it to be like this, but you deserve to know the truth. The truth. I thought I had known it all. I thought I had seen the whole picture. But this was something else entirely. The man I loved, the sister I trusted, had been plotting behind my back. And now that everything was out in the open, I didn't know who I was anymore. Emily's confession came next, just as painful. I couldn't face her. I couldn't even look at her. But she insisted on talking, her voice pleading from the other side of the door. Clara, I'm so sorry. I can't explain how it happened, but I swear I didn't mean to hurt you. I love you, I always have. I never wanted this to tear us apart. Her words were a broken record, and they didn't make any sense. You never wanted to hurt me? I whispered. You were in my house, in my bed, and you never wanted to hurt me. Her silence answered for her. I collapsed onto the floor, my body trembling with emotion. What was I supposed to do now? How was I supposed to face the people who had torn apart everything I ever believed in? The next few days felt like I was living in a fog. Every time I looked at my children, I saw the pieces of a shattered family. Every time I looked at John, I saw the man who had destroyed my life. And every time I saw Emily, I felt a wave of disgust I couldn't shake off. I thought the worst was over, but I was wrong. I wasn't even close to the worst. The days that followed were a blur of numbness and anger, a constant mix of shock and disbelief. I tried to act normal for the sake of the kids, but nothing felt right. Every time I looked at John, I saw a man I didn't recognize, a stranger, wearing the face of the man I had loved for years. And Emily. Every glance at her sent a cold shiver down my spine. John kept apologizing, kept begging for my forgiveness, but the words felt hollow. He kept saying he was sorry, that he didn't mean to hurt me, that he was confused, that he didn't know how to stop himself from falling in love with Emily. But his apologies felt like a mask to hide the truth. I couldn't understand why Emily had done this. She was my sister, my best friend. We'd shared everything. Our childhood secrets, our first heartbreaks, our dreams for the future. How could she betray me in the worst way possible? The pain of what they had done together wasn't just about the physical act. It was the emotional devastation. It was the lies they told, the trust they shattered. The anger was suffocating, but it was nothing compared to the emptiness inside me. Every day felt like I was carrying 1,000 pounds on my shoulders. I didn't even know who I was anymore. I stormed out of the room, unable to breathe in the suffocating atmosphere. I needed space, distance, anything to clear my head. I walked aimlessly through the house, my mind racing. My heart was broken, my trust shattered, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. I grabbed my purse and my keys, and before I even realized it, I was in the car, driving away from the house. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to be away from him, away from Emily, away from everything that had become my life. As I drove, I tried to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions crashing inside me. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw everything back in their faces. But there was another part of me, something much deeper, that was numb, cold, and distant. I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror anymore. Who was she? How had she let this happen? Eventually, I ended up at the park, a place I used to go to when I needed to think. The park was quiet, almost deserted in the late evening, and I sat on a bench, my hands trembling as I stared at the empty space in front of me. But the quiet didn't bring peace. Instead, it magnified everything: the whispers of their lies, the unanswered questions, and the hurt I couldn't escape. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. I had messages from friends, from family, all of them asking if I was okay. But I couldn't answer. What could I say? How could I explain this kind of pain? And then a new message popped up. It was from Emily. "Clara, please, I know you're hurting, and I understand why. But you need to know I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't want this to be the way we ended up." My hands shook as I read it, the familiar pang of betrayal piercing my heart all over again. "I'm so sorry. But I don't know how to fix this. I know I can't undo the damage I've caused. But I want you to know that I love you, and I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't know how to stop. I never meant for it to get this far." The message was a plea for forgiveness, but it felt hollow. I could hear her voice in my head, filled with regret and guilt. But the words didn't change the fact that she had destroyed everything we once had. The trust we had built, the sisterhood, the years of shared memories gone, all because of one mistake that spiraled out of control. I couldn't respond. I couldn't forgive her. Not yet. I threw my phone into my bag and stood up, wiping the tears that had begun to fall without me realizing. My face was wet, my body shaking from the sheer weight of everything that had happened. But there was no turning back now. I couldn't pretend anymore. I had to make a choice. The sound of my phone ringing broke the silence. It was John again. I didn't answer. I couldn't bring myself to speak to him. As I stood there, looking out at the empty park, I realized something. My life, as I knew it, had ended. I could go back home, try to fix everything, but deep down, I knew it would never be the same. Not with John, not with Emily, not with anyone. I had to let go. I had to let go of the life I had built with them, the life that was based on lies. But that didn't mean I was going to give up. No, I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let this define me. It was time to move on. Time to rebuild. But this time, I would do it for me. The next few days passed in a blur of numbness and uncertainty. I spent most of my time alone, trying to come to terms with everything and with myself. There were moments when I thought about going back to John, about giving him another chance. After all, he was my husband. We had a life together. But the thought of it filled me with dread. The trust was gone. How could I live with someone who had betrayed me so deeply? I knew that leaving wasn't going to be easy. But every time I closed my eyes, I could hear Emily's voice, and it was like she was right there with me. The guilt, the pain, the confusion, everything she said was haunting me. I knew she regretted what she'd done, but regret wasn't enough to undo the damage. It wasn't enough to erase the years of love I'd poured into my marriage. I had to make a decision, and this time it had to be for me. One evening, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, the place where I'd once shared meals with John and the kids, where we'd laughed and argued over trivial things. It seemed so far away now, that life. The kitchen, once a symbol of warmth, felt cold and foreign. I pulled out a piece of paper, my hands trembling as I wrote. At first, the words came slowly, unsure, but soon they poured out like a flood. I wrote to John, but not with the hope of reconciliation. I wrote for closure. For myself. John. I don't know what happened to us. I don't know how it came to this, but I do know one thing. I cannot live in a marriage where lies are more powerful than trust. You've hurt me in ways I never thought possible. Not just with Emily, but with every lie, every secret you've kept from me. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you. I don't know if I want to. I've spent so much of my life trying to make things work, trying to hold us together, but somewhere along the way, I lost myself. And now I need to find her again. I'm leaving, John. Not because I don't love you, but because I love myself more. I deserve peace, trust, and honesty. And I can't find that with you anymore. Clara. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table where he would see it. There was no turning back now. This was it. I had made my choice. The kids were staying with a close friend for a few days. I needed the space to breathe, to think, to rebuild. I didn't want them to see the pain in my eyes. They were too young to understand the weight of it all, and I didn't want them to feel this heartache. I knew the next few days would be filled with awkward conversations, with John trying to apologize, trying to make things right. But deep down, I knew it was over. I didn't want him anymore. I didn't want Emily either. My sister had destroyed something irreplaceable, and no amount of apologies would fix it. The days stretched on, but I kept my distance. I didn't answer John's calls. I didn't reply to his messages. I focused on myself. I went for long walks, breathing in the fresh air, feeling the cool breeze against my skin. I needed to reconnect with myself, to remember who I was before all of this, before the betrayal, before the lies. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror, really looking at myself for the first time in days. My reflection stared back at me, tired, but stronger. My eyes had lost some of their brightness, but there was a glimmer of determination in them now. I wasn't the same person I had been when all of this started. I had been broken, but I wasn't shattered beyond repair. I was still me. I still had the power to choose my future, to take back control. And I was going to do just that. The phone rang again, breaking my moment of clarity. I almost didn't want to answer, but something in me needed to hear it. It was John. I hesitated, but then I picked up. Clara, his voice was rough, strained. Can we talk? Please? I know I've hurt you. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but please. I need to explain. I need to fix this. I let the silence linger for a moment, feeling the weight of his words. I don't think there's anything left to explain, John, I said softly. I've made my decision. Clara, don't say that, he begged. You're everything to me. I've messed up, but I swear I'll do anything to make it right. Please, just give me a chance. I've given you enough chances, I replied, my voice steady, no longer wavering. You had your chance, John. You threw it all away. I'm not coming back. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost resigned. Then I guess this is it. I understand. I'll always love you, Clara. The finality of his words hit me harder than I expected. I had prepared myself for this moment, but hearing him say it felt like the last chapter of a book I had once loved. I'll always love you too, I whispered. But I can't keep living like this. With that, I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. The storm inside me had calmed, but the journey ahead was far from over. But I was ready. I was ready to rebuild my life. I started therapy, something I had never considered before, but I knew I needed to work through the emotions I was carrying. The betrayal, the anger, the heartache, they were heavy. I needed help to carry it. The sessions were tough at first. I often found myself at a loss for words, unsure how to express the whirlwind of emotions. But with time, I began to open up, to unravel the years of silence and unspoken hurt that had built up inside of me. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. One day, I sat in the therapist's office, my hands clenched tightly in my lap, as I stared at the floor. The words were harder to say than I thought. "I don't know who I am anymore," I said, my voice shaking. "I used to be someone who loved deeply, who believed in loyalty and trust. But now, I feel like I've lost everything. I feel like I don't even recognize myself." The therapist, a kind woman in her 50s with soft eyes, nodded. "That's okay, Clara. You've been through a lot. It's normal to feel lost. But remember, this doesn't define who you are. It's just a chapter in your life. And you have the power to write the next one." I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. "It doesn't feel like I have much power right now." "You do," she said firmly. "You've already made the hardest decision of your life. Walking away takes strength. Now it's time to reclaim your power, your sense of self. But it won't happen overnight. Healing takes time." The idea of healing felt foreign, almost unreachable. But deep down, I knew she was right. It wasn't going to happen all at once. But each day, I took small steps toward reclaiming myself. I started doing things I hadn't done in years, reading books, taking walks, getting back into painting. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. But as much as I tried to focus on my own healing, the past still lingered. John continued to reach out, his messages filled with desperation and regret. He wanted me to come back, to give him another chance. Emily, too, sent her own apologies, but neither of them understood. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't trust them anymore. I ignored their calls. I let their messages sit unanswered. One afternoon, as I sat in a cafe with a friend, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. I hesitated before opening it, but when I saw who it was, my stomach churned. It was from John's mother. "Clara, please. You don't have to do this. John is lost without you. He's been a wreck. Please reconsider." I read the message a few times, each word stinging more than the last. I could feel the pressure building, the guilt creeping in. But then I remembered what I had been working for. I remembered how far I had come and how much I had fought to make it this far. I couldn't let them pull me back into their web. I took a deep breath and typed my response. "I've made my decision. Gloria. I can't keep living in the past. I need to move forward. I won't be coming back." I pressed send before I could second-guess myself. The silence that followed was deafening. The weight of that decision hung in the air, but I felt a sense of peace settle over me. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was being pulled in two different directions. I had chosen my path, and I was going to walk it no matter how hard it got. The next few weeks brought new challenges. There were days when I felt the old familiar pangs of loneliness, when I wished I had someone to lean on. The kids were adjusting to the new arrangement, and I did my best to keep things stable for them. But there were moments when I missed John's presence, his laugh, his touch. It was hard not to, especially when I found myself second-guessing my decision late at night, when the house was too quiet and the weight of the world seemed to settle on my shoulders. But I kept reminding myself why I made that decision. I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for my children. They needed a mother who could stand tall and show them what it meant to be resilient, to choose themselves, no matter how difficult the path. It was on a rainy afternoon, while I was sitting by the window with a cup of tea, that I realized something. I was finally starting to feel like myself again. It wasn't about having all the answers or having everything figured out. It was about learning. It was on a rainy afternoon, while I was sitting by the window with a cup of tea, that I realized something. I was finally starting to feel like myself again. It wasn't about having all the answers or having everything figured out. It was about learning to trust myself, to believe in my own strength. And as I watched the rain fall outside, I knew that this was just the beginning. The beginning of my healing. The beginning of my new life. The next day, I got a text from my sister Emily. I had been avoiding her messages for weeks, unsure of what to say. She hadn't asked to meet up or call. She hadn't apologized in the way I expected, and yet I knew she was hurting too. I could see the guilt in her words, even though she didn't say it directly. Clara, I know I've messed up. I'm sorry. I never meant for things to go the way they did. Can we talk? I need to explain. Maybe we can start over slowly. I miss you. I stared at the screen for a long time. Emily was my sister. We had been close once, but that had been before everything. Before the betrayal, before the secrets, before the damage was done. But despite everything, I knew that healing wasn't just about forgiving others, it was about forgiving myself too. I thought about it, about what it would take for us to rebuild anything. Maybe we would never have the relationship we once did, but maybe we could find a new way forward. I typed a response. I'm not sure what starting over looks like right now, but I'm open to talking. It's going to take time, but I'm willing to try if you are. It wasn't a promise, but it was a step toward healing, a step toward mending the broken pieces. It wasn't about going back to how things were. It was about forging a new path, one where we could both move forward. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The road ahead wasn't clear. It was still full of uncertainty, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of what the future held because I knew I had the strength to face it. I had already survived the hardest part. I had walked away. I had chosen myself. And now I was free. The chapter had closed, but the story was far from over.